daily phenomenal activity, right? So GQ is our guest, first-time guest here on Coast to Coast. He's had many UFO and abduction encounters. He's studied world religions. He'll tell us about that. Shamanism, 30 years. He can astral project, lucid dreaming, near-death experience, of course. Usually when that happens, people have these wonderful talents and abilities afterwards, even more so. And he remembers 2 of his past lives. He's been living and exploring, but then they're all coming to him because he's right there in the Appalachian foothills for the past 25 years. And I believe he's got like 40 acres where there's lots of activity happening. There's more to know about him, but let's bring him in and welcome GQ. Welcome to Coast AM. How you doing tonight?
Good evening, Connie. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great.
People are like, GQ, who's GQ? What's that about? There's a lot of people that have experiences and they don't want to say their name. They don't want the attention, but they want to give the information, and that's kind of where you're at.
That's correct.
So you want to tell us any more about GQ? Are you hot? You did have some modeling background. So yes, the answer is yes.
Did modeling in Los Angeles for a while, and according to my old bassist in Belize, I'm hot for 2024.
Living in the foothills for what, 25 years, is that right?
That's right, yes. It's a dark, stormy night here in my haunted house. What's
around you? What's lurking amongst you?
Well, right here on my property and in the immediate area, there's lots of, I like to call it paranormal activity. According to my friend Bobo, that's what he doesn't like paranormal either. He likes pre-normal because it will be normal at some point. We live in a house that's haunted by one of the previous owners. She passed away, and it's more like a poltergeist thing. Nothing malevolent, just lets us know she's here pretty much daily. The first time I experienced her was I was here by myself. I was in the bedroom late at night, and I heard right behind the bedroom wall is stairs that comes to the studio, and I heard what sounded like a bookcase full of books being pushed down the stairs, and all the books and everything just, that's, you can imagine what that would sound like. Yeah, so I got up and I went and I opened the basement door. Of course, there's no bookcase on the stairs and no books, and walked all around the house and nothing. But that was my first experience. The most recent thing that's been, I mean, it's a daily occurrence, but the most recent thing that was really, my lady and I, Ann, were both here. It was at night. We were getting ready for bed. I was in the bedroom. She was in the kitchen. And we heard what sounded like a light bulb exploding in the socket and shattering onto the floor. Very loud, distinctive. We both met in the middle of the house, both heard it, looked all around, no light bulbs. That was the most recent.
But you've had more things outside, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Nightly. Yep. We have UFOs nightly here, right over the forest behind my house. It's Daniel Boone National Forest, connects with my property. And I live on top of a mountain, and it's over the valley behind my house. Every night, right at dusk or dark, maybe a couple thousand feet away and about 1,000 feet off the ground, there'll be a UFO hovering and flashing all different colors. And there's 2 different ones that come. There's one that's like the triangle shape with the lights on three corners. And then there's another one that is really unusual. It's round, and it almost looks alive. It's like golden and shimmering and all kinds of lights, and it'll change colors from gold to green to red, white. And I have so many videos of it. When it first started happening about 5 years ago, I started taking a lot of video. And one night, I talked to Linda Mullen Howe she had, I sent her like one of the first videos, and wasn't on a tripod because I was pretty excited, and I just grabbed the camera and started filming. She was like, "You need to put it on a tripod," and I was like, "Okay, well, I'll do that tonight." So it showed up, and I got the camera out, and I noticed it looked better with the infrared setting. So I turned it on and was getting ready to put it on a tripod, and an orb flew out of the craft right down into my backyard. It flew through my backyard along the tree line of the forest. Then it turned, made a 90-degree turn, and came up to the second-floor bedroom window where I was filming, hovered there for a second, about the size of a softball, just stayed there for a second, and there's a power line that runs right there between the window and where it was, just a few feet from the window. It was only about 5 feet away, and the power line started sparking, and then it flew off to the left out of my field of vision, and I got all of that on video.
It came to look at you and say, "Hey, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
Did you get that feeling?
I did, for sure. And since then, they would wake me up every morning at like 3:30 every morning. I would wake up and I would get this feeling like, the feeling like, say you've got a friend or family member coming to visit you haven't seen for a while, and they're coming that next day, and you wake up and you're excited about them coming. I would wake up with that feeling 3:30 every morning and walk into the kitchen to get some espresso, and would look out the kitchen window, and there they would be, the triangle right over the forest, a couple thousand feet away.
So you know the difference of contactee and abductee, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Which one would you be?
Well, I was definitely abducted or kidnapped, as I like to say.
So you weren't happy about it. Yeah, the contactees are like, "Bring it on, come on, take me." But the other
then
abductees.
Later in life, in my 30s, when I started studying shamanism and going to this cave, I was a contactee because I was to interact with all of these entities.
Wow, so you would actually wake up and say, "Okay, you woke me up, I'm going to get an espresso for this one."
Yeah.
So because of that, though, did it help you remember being taken? Or did you get taken every time? Or did you just maybe see them? Do you remember some of your takings?
Oh, yes. I remember many of my abductions and contactee experiences. Yeah, I would stand there and look out the window and sipping my coffee, and I could telepathically ask a question, or at first I just started saying, "Good morning, I see you there," and they would flash their lights, and they would move all around, do maneuvers, Then I was like, okay, well, then they definitely know I'm here, and they definitely know I'm talking to them. So then I started asking them questions, and I would get answers, not immediately, maybe within a few minutes, or maybe within a week or 2 weeks. I would get the answer that I was looking for.
Did you ask telepathically?
Yes.
That's important. I think that's the universal language. So
I agree. Yes.
Yeah.
That and music or sound frequencies.
Why do you say that?
Being a lifelong musician, professional musician for the last 45 years, I guess, I've learned a lot about sonic frequencies and music and how it affects the body physiologically. Especially when I started studying shamanism, I would use this Navajo drum that came from the Lakota out west, and it's a certain frequency that when heated up by a campfire, it just seems to, especially if you're in a place like this cave where I go, where the veil seems to be really thin, it can facilitate these type of experiences. Then I started studying Kundalini and Pranayama yoga and learning about the mantras and the sound, how basically in all the world religions there's some kind of a Om or Amen, something like that. and the power that has, and and the power of words, which are sound, and not even to get into the powers of levitation and other physical reactions to sound. But yeah.
One of the people that was studying, Dennis Foll, was studying the Pancake House, the Erickson Project, which was in Kentucky. And I think it might have also been right in that same area. I know at least that in the particular area where they were doing this big Bigfoot study for I think 5 years. And it was like the first one ever where somebody put money down. I think it was $3 to $5 million or something like that. Let's just say $3 million just to be safe. But Daniel Boone had written down what I was told, and I hope I remember this properly, but Daniel Boone had written down in his journal that he had seen something that he would call pumpkin heads in that, close to where you are. Pumpkin heads. So Bigfoot looking, but pumpkin heads. Isn't that creepy? Have you seen anything like that?
Well,
not yet.
I do know a bit about Daniel Boone and his history. Before I get into that, I just wanted to mention about the nightly UFO thing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, it happens, every evening and then every morning. So we've just gotten used to it, for 5 years. So it'll be like getting ready for bed, and I'll look out the window and Ann will be like, "Hey, are they out there tonight? Are your friends out there?" I'm like, "Yeah, there they are." Okay. or when she gets up in the middle of the night to go to the restroom, she'll look out the bathroom window and she'll tell me the next day, "Yeah, your friends were out there."
Oh.
So,
did she know anything about this before ever meeting you?
Oh, no, not at all.
Any of these types of things? Oh.
Yeah, I never even thought about it or anything like that, and wouldn't have believed it if she hadn't seen it for herself.
Well, good for you to be able to keep her, because most people run
yeah.
when they learn that, right?
Yeah, I am the luckiest man in the world in that department.
Oh, excellent. Good for you and her. Good for the both of you.
But it was
I
funny.
saw a picture recently of you both, and it's very nice,
yeah.
very nice picture. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so recently I had a bunch of friends here. There's probably 10 people visiting. Nathan and Steve and some other folks, and we'd been talking during the day, and I'd mentioned to them, the UFOs, they show up every night at dusk like clockwork, and they listened, and I'm sure I know one of the guys is completely skeptical, but whatever. I just threw that out there. So then later in the evening, we're sitting out on the deck, just kind of doing some chit-chat and enjoying the night. And one of the cameramen walks out, actually the skeptical guy. He walks out into the yard, and he looks up where I had pointed out earlier, and he goes, "Hey, there's the UFO, right where Glenn said it would be."
At the right exact time.
And ran out there and grabbed their phones and cameras and started filming. And it stayed around for over an hour and a half, maybe at least.
He's not the crazy man we thought he was behind his back.
Yeah, I think I sent you some of that video, too. We're hitting up with a laser pointer, and it was changing colors and moving all around.
Interesting stuff. What do you, now, some of my friends talk about the ones that change color as plasma vehicles. What do you think of that?
Well, I've looked at it through a telescope and filmed it also, but looked at it through a telescope, and I would say that's a pretty accurate description of the surface of it, because it almost looks alive or molten or moving, and it'll just change all different colors. It's pretty amazing.
And the other one doesn't, right?
No, it's like the triangle shape, and it has the lights on the 3 points, and those lights do change color, but it's the classic, triangle shape, and that's usually the one in the morning.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you're living the dream. That's my dream. I want to be in a certain area where this stuff happens constantly, so you can grow that relationship, right? You can. Mine's called the Blue Rock Chateau. That's what I'm working on. Is getting there. It just costs money to live in certain mountainous areas. It costs big money, but you are right there in the spot where it's happening around you. So when I go to the areas I like to go to, I mean, it's like, okay, why is this always here? Why do I see this thing flying around? Why are these things happening here? Why is there so much activity? And I have a couple of different theories. In your area, why do you feel, there's entities, they seem to be in areas, but it doesn't always seem like there's always a consistent UFO. I'm not saying there's not, but not that you always see them. You're in a spot where you also see them too. And I find that very interesting. That's why I was like, oh man, we got to get you on here. This is too cool. So what is your theory with all your remote viewing skills, your astral projection skills, all this stuff around you, your shamanism, all this other stuff you've learned? What do you think that those two ships are there for? Do you have a thought of what they might be doing?
I do, and it's one of the things I would ask them in the morning when I was getting my espresso. What are you guys doing here? And I've gotten a few. It's a multifaceted answer. One of the things is they're in the valley where they hover above. There are a lot of caves, a lot of old mines. Lots and lots of caves. And underneath all of that is a thing called the Kentucky anomaly. And it's this giant quartz layer beneath Kentucky that NASA found from space.
Oh.
And, I mean, you can see it everywhere here. There's quartz everywhere. Quartz crystals just popping out of the ground. And then in that same area is the place where I guess what you would call a portal was photographed, where it just opened up in the forest long enough to get a picture and then closed. I think it has a lot to do with the caves, the quartz, maybe the mines, the portal, or whatever that was. Some kind of I don't know if there's a underground base or if it's a refueling station because of the quartz, maybe because there's been some talk of from scientists that have seen some of the recovered crafts that quartz is used, quartz crystal. So, and it does have a piezoelectric effect. So those are just some of the things I've gleaned recently.
Yeah. Even like the areas I know, it seems like there's always some sort of maybe mining or patrolling an area, and I don't know if it's mining area they're patrolling. They've got some sort of mission or project, or maybe even they're patrolling the holes that takes them down to where they are in the earth. It's like,
and
I don't know. What's that big city? Maybe they've got going on down there.
Could be, yeah. And there is an army base close by, very close as the crow flies. It is very close, and I've seen, you won't see a single helicopter during the day, but at night, especially when these things are out there's a lot of helicopter activity. It's almost like they're just doing flybys and checking them out. And a couple of years back, they sent a larger, this military base, I should say, this was where they stored, was the last storage facility for chemical weapons in the United States. But so they sent a larger helicopter, like a Black Hawk, and it flew around this the plasma-like UFO a couple of times at a distance, kind of like they always do. And then when it came back around, it got too close, and the UFO shot out a laser beam and hit the helicopter. The helicopter lost all power and started free-falling for about a second or two, and then they regained power and got the hell out of here.
That's interesting that you said that, because before you said that, I was going to say, well, do you think it's the armies and they are reverse engineering something, or maybe they've created their own from something,
No.
but not when it shot at us. That's not cool. That's not fun.
No, that's my friend Shannon said that's a brown pants moment for those guys.
I've never heard that. That's good. I got the visual.
Yeah. But I'm sure,
Interesting. That's interesting. So they know all about it.
They haven't done that since. They still fly around at a safe distance, but not like that.
Huh. Well, that's interesting, too, that one orb came out of it, an intelligent orb flying around and come right to your face,
Yeah. While I'm holding the camera filming it.
Busted. Hey, I see you. I'm right here. What do you think you're doing, dude? Guess what? We're coming to take you. Those probes are real. You're going to walk funny tomorrow. That's all I'm saying. Oh, my goodness. Wow. So have you ever seen any of the things that might be flying it, or, have you seen grays or reptilians or any mantis, anything?
Not here on the property, but in my lifetime, and especially at the cave, yes.
The cave. Tell me about the cave.
There's a very close cave to me, and speaking of Daniel Boone, it's one of the places he used to camp when he came into Kentucky exploring, because there were lost silver mines in this area. There's a legend of the John Swift silver mines in this area, and he was looking for these and exploring, and it was right off the major Native American trail that goes from Florida up to Michigan. So this cave is right there, and it's been used for tens of thousands of years. There are petroglyphs in it, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful spot, magical spot. And so he would camp there, and he told about his Bigfoot encounter. He was hunting with his son, and here in Kentucky, and his son was attacked by a Bigfoot and grabbed him, picked him up, threw him down on the ground. He heard his son yell, and so by the time he got to him, it had picked him up again and slammed him down on the ground. And by this time, he thought, well, if he picks him up again and does that, he's going to kill my son. So he shot it in the chest, and it didn't really faze him. So he reloaded and shot him again. I think he hit him right in the eye and killed it. And he said when he was looking at it, he cut it open and skinned it. Was wondering why the first shot didn't kill it. And he said that it had instead of having ribs like we do, it had just a solid piece of bone there, like a breastplate almost. That was his encounter right around here.
I had never, ever heard of that. I've never heard of any of that, not even a brush of it.
Yeah, and he called it a Yahoo because at the time he was reading the Jonathan Swift book, and one of the characters was this hairy character, beast kind of character, and they called it a Yahoo.
Is that the one that he would call pumpkin heads too, or something different? Because there's varieties of them.
The pumpkin head story.
Yeah. Look into that.
But I know Davy Crockett also had an experience in Tennessee where he saw one. But that was, so I'm not sure if the pumpkin head was Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, nope. I heard it was Daniel Boone.
Okay.
Maybe I'll be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Daniel Boone, because I was like, Daniel Boone, yeah, because Kentucky. And so as a fellow Kentuckian, go Big Blue, by the way.
That's right.
Just saying. So, I mean, how close are you to Mammoth Cave?
Mammoth Cave, I'm guessing maybe around 2.5 hours.
Okay.
But the thing about Mammoth Cave and just this part of Kentucky, they've only explored about 400 miles or more, a little more, of that cave system. But it seems to run completely under the state, from there all the way over to where I am. So there seems to be some caves that are connected all the way across the state.
That's interesting, because especially living there and having the same types of life and experiences as you. So that maybe there's something to all that, to all of us Kentuckians. I don't know, because we're into it, all of us for sure. Good night. That was great. So tonight's guest, I've heard all the information, but I didn't know the name. We're talking with James Bartley. He has investigated alien abductions, particularly reptilian abductions.
I'm fine, Connie. Thank you for having me here. I spent a lot of time in Nevada, the desert southwest, really. Astral Dreamscape is where a lot of the behavior modification, programming, mind control is conducted by various archontic beings, be they human or non-human, innate know-how or through technological means. 2 points. One is we spend a lot of time sleeping, and most people are not lucid dreamers, are not. And even lucid dreamers, on occasion, can have their dreams hacked and manipulated, but what I call stage-managed dreams, the ability of some of these beings to essentially take over your dream from within and guide it in a certain way, create mental imagery, scenery for particular purposes, behavior modification purposes, whether to eroticize the dreamscape, make the dreamscape really frightening, put the person in a dreamscape scenario which calms them down or puts them in a state where they're more receptive to whatever is going on or is being planned for them. Secondly, and this is an important point, we are resonators. We're emitters of frequency. And what we're talking about is emotional, energetic harvesting, a loosh fest, if you will. These entities, these archontic entities of various stripes, be they interdimensional, extraterrestrial, subterrestrial, whatever the case may be, the negative ones, it behooves them to keep us in a negative frequency bandwidth. Because if we're always resonating at a high frequency of serenity, of harmony, feelings of bliss and love, but still aware of what's going on in our surroundings, that doesn't do much for them. So they strive at all hazards to keep us in a lower frequency bandwidth, because then we begin to merge with their bandwidth, their frequency. So what the astral dreamscape manipulation is all about is, if you look at it from a tactical standpoint, these beings have a tactical high ground. We go to sleep, we go into a REM state, we start dreaming, and then what these beings can do is they can start manipulating our dreams. And they can inculcate phobias into us. If we never had fears or phobias about heights, suddenly we can start having recurring dreams of being stuck on a cliff face, unable to move up, unable to move down, no handholds to grasp onto. Oftentimes, the dreamer who's had their dream hacked has no recourse but to just jump and get the dream over with, hope they wake up, and oftentimes that does lead to person awakening, is they just jump from that scenario. Or can instill a phobia of spiders, where dream after dream, recurring dreams, these people are made to dream about spiders, big spiders, small spiders, and it's not just spiders, it could be large roaches, They know that we, being the human race, for the most part, not everybody, but for the most part, we are cleanly, hygienic beings. So, again, in an effort to put us ill at ease, put us in a state of disharmony, we could find ourselves in an astral dreamscape scenario where we're just surrounded by filth, where there's pardon the Anunnaki. I hope this is not too offensive for people, but I'm not trying to be graphic. I'm just being clinical about this. The person who's had their astral dreamscape hacked, essentially, can suddenly find himself in a really disgusting bathroom. There could be feces and urine on the floor. They could be standing before a toilet bowl that's overflowing with this horrible stuff in it. Or conversely, they could be standing out in the field and they're either barefoot or they're in their socks and there's just nothing but feces laying around. Okay, these are not weird fetishes. This is nothing that, the Freudian types can sit and, okay, let's analyze this, tell me about your mother. It's none of that. This is externally imposed manipulation to put us ill at ease because, again, we're resonators, we're emitters of frequency. And so from an emotional, energetic harvesting standpoint, they want to keep us in this lower frequency bandwidth. What better way to manipulate our astral dreamscape, inculcate phobias, fetishes? It could be the other way around where they highly eroticize our astral dreamscape. Many of these beings can alter their density, alter their frequency. So as we're lying asleep, they can literally, even if they can be corporeal one moment on board a ship or in an underground base or subterranean cavern system, they can manifest through a portal entry, for example, in our bedrooms or come out of a portal entry in our closet, and then they can alter their density. So they can slip into us, essentially, while we're sleeping and then take over our astral dreamscape from within. So I call these stage-managed dreams. And there's various aspects of these stage-managed dreams. Again, just keep in mind the emotional, energetic harvesting, the louche aspect of this. We have the frustration dreams where we're just, and this is part of the Astral Dreamscape Adjustment Bureau aspect too, where we're giving a seemingly impossible task. Oftentimes it's a classroom setting. Nobody tells us anything. Okay, here's what you're supposed to do, James. Here's your task. Do this, do this, do this. And when you finish, turn in your paperwork, right? So you're sitting there in our example, and this is very common, commonly reported, in a classroom scenario. You don't know anything about the assignment. And then what appears to be other students in the classroom are getting up, turning in their assignments to the teacher in the front of the class, but no one's told you anything. You're just sitting there frustrated. And that's the point. It's a frustration dream. Now, what some people have done, and I've done this, I just got up and left. I got up and left the classroom. So you can try to change it. Where the Adjustment Bureau kicks in is they try to reel you back in, get you lost in another dream, and then reel you back in somehow. And then there are other types of dreams where I call these unloved dreams. And these could be very emotionally trying, very emotionally draining. Basically what it amounts to is you find yourself in a dreamscape setting where everyone you come across, whether you know them in real life, you knew them a long time ago, or you've never met them before, or all of the above, every time you come up to these people and you expect to engage with them in some way, they either are dismissive of you, want nothing to do with you, are revolted by you, and basically want nothing to do with you. I call these unloved dreams, right? So you go from one person to another, one individual. These could be NPCs, non-participating character types, but they've just been created as part of this astral dreamscape simulated environment illusion, if you will. But the emotions engendered are very real because we are compassionate by nature. We're empathic by nature. We like to have a connection with others. And so in our example, if we go from one person to another in an astral dreamscape, and especially in these scenarios, if it's someone you know and love and someone you've known for ages, and then they reject you in these dreams, that can be devastating, emotionally devastating. You wake up really feeling poorly about yourself. So that happens.
Is all this where they're going in and controlling and manipulating, is it for control, or is it so that they can learn from us?
There are more than one species of being that will do this. Greys will do this kind of thing. Mantis beings will do this. Various other types of ETs and interdimensional type beings. The military can do this too, and I can get more into that. But the purpose, at least some of it, is to modify the behavior of the person going through these experiences over time so it affects them in their normal waking consciousness. They would like nothing more than instilling phobias in people, instilling obsessive, compulsive thought loops. And one of my colleagues, Jerry Marzinski, he spent 30 years in the working with psychotic patients in the largest asylum, sanitarium in Georgia. And then when they closed that place down, he worked for a number of years in the Arizona correctional facility system, where once again he worked with psychotic patients. And he found out quite independently, because I'd come to the same conclusion some time ago, that the voices, the intrusive thoughts that people hear in their head, oftentimes in their own thought voice, if you will, these are not their own thought voices. And they are not clairaudient or clairaudient hallucinations. What these are, from our perspective, our 3D perspective, rapidly merging in a fourth dimension, but from our perspective, these are non-corporeal entities that have the ability to insert their thoughts into our own minds, in our own thought voices, making us think that we're coming up with all these bad ideas and following through on bad ideas and following through on bad behaviors. What these entities are capable of doing, especially when male is concerned, but it also affects females. Males are more inclined to be, as far as mental imagery is concerned, we're more susceptible from a mental imagery standpoint. This is why you hear in extreme cases like serial killers and serial rapists, they talk about these images of sadism, gore, rape, violence, flooding their conscious mind, and they really can't do anything about it, right? Because by that point, this interface is taking place between the entity or entities and the individual, the hybrid individual, our example, to the point where they can just at any time just instill all these lurid thoughts into the mental imagery of somebody, forcing them to see it. And this is reinforced by cinema, this is reinforced by Hollywood, this is reinforced by TV and what have you. So, again, to get back to your question, it's for purposes of behavior modification to manipulate their feelings, emotions, make them more impulsive. And this is all tied in also. If it's from an ET interdimensional perspective, and those ETs, in our example, would have access to certain technology, and the military is doing this more and more, they can deliberately target the parts of our neurology, in particular the frontal lobe, which is the impulse control center. They can beam that while the person is having a stage-managed dream, essentially in an astral dreamscape virtual environment. And they can put them through all kinds of scenarios, sometimes involving incessant fighting or running or being attacked by mobs. Meanwhile, while they're in that astral dreamscape and simulated environment, their brains are getting blasted. Their frontal lobe is being zapped by frequencies. And the purpose is to chip away at their frontal lobe capacity, their impulse control network, if you will. So it's a combination of things. If they make them more compulsive, impulsive, these intrusive thoughts that I mentioned, right? Jerry Marzinski worked with dozens, not hundreds, of psychotic patients in and out of prisons. And the things they would tell them, right, that these entities, especially the inmates who were meth users and the derivatives of crystal methadone, such as commonly known as crank, those types of drugs are a gateway, big-time gateway, to allowing negative, parasitic, archontic entities to eventually take people up as hosts. And it wouldn't take long, because those drugs, crystal meth and its variants, they have a sympathetic resonance with some of these negative, lower dimensional archontic beings. So once someone gets hooked on meth, in our example, it's so much easier for those entities to flood its mind with just ghastly imagery, mental imagery, in and out of the astral dreamscape. So getting back to the whole thing about the Astral Dreamscape Adjustment Bureau, one final point to reemphasize, and then I'll get into the Adjustment Bureau aspect, is the frustration dreams. And earlier I gave an example of sitting in a classroom, you have a homework assignment or a class assignment, nobody tells you what's going on, no one gives you any instructions, you're frustrated, right? And time passes excruciatingly slowly in these scenarios, so it's not just a dream. Where a typical dream, you just be hit with juxtaposed images left, right, and center. They don't always have to have any coherent logic or sense to them. You're just having a crazy dream. Well, these are not dreams. You know the sensation of time is passing very slowly. You're in a place, you've got this homework, this class assignment, no one's telling you what to do, the frustration mounts. A variant of that is where you're given a hands-on task using small motor skills. And again, no one gives you any instructions. No one tells you what to do. You could have building blocks. You could have Lego-looking things. It could be a puzzle or something. But whatever the case may be, you have this compulsion, this urge to, and my feeling is that there's some externally imposed thought form being pushed into our consciousness to get us to go ahead and try to solve this puzzle or put together these Lego blocks or whatever. And despite your best efforts, no matter what you do, you can't do it right. The parts don't fit together. The thing keeps falling apart after you think that you've managed to put them together even halfway decent, and the frustration mounts up. That's what I call a frustration dream, because all the time you're exuding whoosh. Again, we're emotional, energetic beings. Emotions, energy, and motion. And these beings, they feed off of negative emotions. In particular, keep us in a negative frequency bandwidth, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, etc. That benefits them. So where the Astral Dreamscape Adjustment Bureau comes in is, and I've spoken to some others, and I've experienced it myself. And let me give you a real example of what I dreamt and how it wound up, and how I realized after the fact, when I had time to analyze and go over my dream, that there was an element of an Adjustment Bureau aspect to it. And this is how it played out. I had a dream. I was at a train platform. This very high-tech train pulled up, and it disgorged all these college students, presumably college students, and they were, for the most part, they were all Caucasian, so I just assumed, okay, I'm in some mostly Caucasian country, whether in Europe or America or someplace, right? And all the students that were getting off of the train, it was a very high-tech, very sleek-looking train, had to pass through a control checkpoint that was manned by, get this, Chinese military personnel, right? CCP, People's Liberation Army types, right? So they had to go through this checkpoint, and once they got to the checkpoint, they had to go across this footbridge, which took them to about the sixth floor of a building across, it bridged the intervening gap between the train platform and this building, was this footpath, this footbridge rather. So all the kids, college age students, go through the checkpoint, and they're funneled into this building. And I was one of them, okay? I was semi-lucid, so I'm thinking, okay, interesting Chinese military personnel, all these kids going into this kind of building, whether it's like a re-education center or something. So anyway, I get in there, right? And there's a spiral staircase, and all these kids are going up this spiral staircase. I'm thinking, okay, recon mode. I'm going to be doing some intel gathering here, find out what the hell this is all about, right? And no sooner had I had that thought when this huge 3-ring binder with real, those 3-ring binders with the really thick, big rings, right? And this thing was as thick as a dictionary, had innumerable separators, dividers inside of it, right? Next thing you know, lack of a better term, this thick 3-ring binder type, and the paper inside of it was, if you remember the old-fashioned carbon copy paper, crinkly, and then you'd write on it, and then underneath you'd see how your writing had left an impression on the carbon paper, that kind of thing. Well, the paper was super thin. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of pages in this binder. And suddenly it manifested in my hands. And just like all these other students, they're carrying books and binders, what have you. And next thing you know, this really super thick 3-ring binder kind of like explodes in my hand, and papers and separators are flying everywhere, and they all come raining down. And then I get this compulsion, this urge to somehow put them all into order, right? Remember, there's innumerable dozens of separators, different kinds, different colored separators, and, you know, all that stuff. Somehow I got it into my pointed head. Oh, I got to put all this back in order. Of course, it was an insuperable task, because how would I know what correct order it's in? Secondly, the pages are so thin, so crinkly. You know, how do I even manage to get them back onto the rings, right? Let alone in order. And I kept trying over and over. Meanwhile, all these students are just walking past me, stepping over me, stepping on the papers like I'm not even there. And I'm kneeling down frustrated because I can't put this thing in order, right? And I did that for a while, getting frustrated. Finally, I realized, hey, this is pointless, this is stupid. A moment ago, I was thinking of, like, doing a recon here, right? So finally, I said, oh, stuff this. I'm not doing it anymore. And then I walked up the spiral staircase, found myself in a room, a classroom, okay? So I'm sitting up there, and it's very common where one finds himself in an astral kind of classroom. There's not much activity. No one's really talking. Presumably there's a teacher up there at the front of the desk. They're either standing there or they're sitting there, but they're not talking, right? So I'm sitting there in this classroom, and again, time is passing excruciatingly slowly. It's not a dream because you feel the sensation of time passing ever so slowly. And what I've done on previous occasions, when I found myself in these scenarios, was I start looking around at the faces of the people around me to see if they're like zombied out or they're phased out or whatever. And then if I seem to notice some level of conscious awareness in one or more people, presumably people, okay, because, again, there's astral dreamscape manipulation. They could just be some kind of holographic projection, whatever the case may be. But what I did at that point was I kind of stood up from my desk and started telling everybody, this is an astral dreamscape manipulation scenario. Right now, you're probably all laying in bed right now, but somehow, some way, you've been made to go into this classroom, sit here, no one's telling us anything, and look at you, you're all just sitting there. You should be as upset about this as I am, right? And after a while, I said, okay, and I've done this before too, and others have done this. I kind of channeled my inner Keith Moon, so to speak, and then I started throwing things around, like knocking my desk over, thrashing things, right? Just to get these people sitting there. Again, they could have been, the benefit of hindsight, what have you. It could have just been simulation. But here I am making a ruckus, trying to get them to, quote unquote, wake up. And I carried on being disruptive and making a ruckus for a while. And eventually, I guess, whoever had put me in this astral dreamscape adjustment bureau scenario tired of me being disruptive. And then they either just, I can't remember exactly which, whether they allowed me just to lapse out of that into a regular dream and left me alone the rest of the night, or I woke up, because the memory of all that was still fresh in my mind.
Where did it all start with you? A lifer that you've been taken, abducted all your life? Yes,
I've had experiences since I was a child, and I know Brett. Brett's a brilliant guy.
He's great.
He's been on my show before too. I've had experiences at least as far back as childhood, 4 years old. It would take too long to describe the experiences, but I really didn't have a conceptual framework with which to understand them. It wasn't until, because so often with us, if we have something strange or unusual happen, we kind of put it into that back shelf, back burner, don't worry about it, right? It doesn't really make sense at the moment. And then what happened was, although I've always had an interest in UFOs, aliens, Bermuda Triangle, Bigfoot, all that stuff, other dimensions, ever since I was a boy. I was really interested in Greek mythology, particularly when I was a boy. So all of that was not unusual or strange or unbelievable or fantastic to me. And after a while, I've had so many experiences that I began to take them almost for granted. when I'd have psychic experiences or astral out-of-body experiences or even UFO sightings, right? And UFO dreams. I had countless UFO dreams, but again, I didn't have a conceptual framework to try to understand it until 1990. I spent a summer in Germany. I've told the story many times, but after I come back from Germany, back to San Jose, California, I had a series of experiences culminating in a full-blown waking encounter with reptilian greys. These are a hybridized version of the greys and the reptilians. Instead of fingers with nails on them, they had clawed hands, what the late great Dr. Carla Turner called chicken claws, right? Because that's what they look like. They had clawed hands, talons, and they had kind of a grayish, bluish tone to their skin. And oddly enough, in my darkened room, they seemed to emit their own light source because I could see them clearly in what should have been a very dark room, right? So anyway, 3 of them appeared in my bedroom. Long story short, took me up into a craft, a big one, and things kind of unraveled from there. Now, the next morning, I promised my friend that his car was in the shop, and I don't think I had to go to school or had to work that next morning. So I promised to drop him off, or pick him up, rather, and drop him off to work because I had the time to do it. And so it just happened to be one of those occasions when, like, they were going to do a street sweeping in that neighborhood, and all of the owners, all the homeowners and renters on that street, they either had their cars in the garage or in the driveways, right? So I'm parked in front of my friend's house, literally the only car out in the street it was at a cul-de-sac. And that added to my sense of isolation and frustration and fear, right? So I'm sitting out there waiting for my friend to come in to my car. Finally, he steps into my car, and the first thing I blurted out to him was, I had a horrible nightmare, right? And I just kept repeating it to him. I had a horrible nightmare, and all the way until I dropped him off at work. And for a while, I was pretty skittish, right? And so what I did was, I did the only thing that I knew to do under the circumstances was I resolved to read as much about the subject as possible, right? So I would drive like 30, 40 minutes to a shopping center called the East Ridge Mall in Eastside San Jose. I don't know about now, but they used to have a popular bookseller chain in America called B. Dalton's, right? And so I went in there and I basically cleaned them out of all their alien abduction books, Bun Hopkins and the Andreessen Affair books, The Watchers, written by Ray Fowler about Betty Andreessen, of course, Communion. And it dawned on me, right, after reading these books that this is what I had been going through. And then what I did was I got a legal pad of paper, the yellow, extra long legal pads of paper, and I wrote down from memory every unusual or strange thing that I could recall, including dreams, because in these alien abduction books, a lot of memories, fragmented memories, hidden memories, etc., seem to surface a lot in dreams. So I also would write down dreams that I'd remembered that had a UFO or alien theme. And no exaggeration, after about 7 pages on a legal pad, writing down everything I could ever remember, I realized, well, you know what? I must be one of these people that are having these experiences. And then fast forward to when I moved to San Diego. See, San Jose, California, I don't know about now, but back then was kind of a backwater of UFO research. The few people that I did know that were into the subject, they were very territorial. They were very possessive. They did not have a spirit of cooperation and understand the concept of networking. I was just greeted with fear and paranoia everywhere I went when I was trying to find others who had similar experiences. So eventually I moved to San Diego.
And James, by the way, that's very important to do, to collaborate like that and share the stories and see what you have in common.
Yes, because it provides validation. And
yeah.
It provides, it's a boost to you. it really does wonders for your morale to meet others.
And it's scary to know that you're the only one, too, right? That's not cool either.
Because I was bursting at the seams to talk about the subject, right? Because I've been reading all these books, and I was starting to do a lot of research on my own and try to sort out what memories I had of these various experiences. And so I was kind of bursting at the seams. And although I didn't delve into detail, when I was around different groups of friends, neighborhood party friends, for example, or college party friends, right, I would bring these subjects up. And often as not, I'd be met with like gales of laughter, right? And the irony is, the funny thing is prior to that, they kind of thought of me as kind of a smart guy. Oh, James usually got something interesting to talk about, right? Let's ask him about history or whatever, because they know, I'm a student of military history. I like reading history. I follow geopolitical events. So not that I was ever on a soapbox or anything, but they'd ask me my thoughts about things. I'd give my 2 cents worth, right? So prior to all this, they thought I was a pretty smart guy. I started bringing up the aliens, right? Later, suddenly I'm not so smart anymore, right? And so eventually I moved to San Diego, became a member in good standing of the San Diego UFO Society. And from there, it was like my world just totally changed because the people that were there were really into networking. Sean Atlanty, the founder of the San Diego UFO Society, was extremely well connected. I mean, the researchers and investigators whose books I'd read, he knew these guys on a first-name basis. He could call them up at any time. He was buddies with them, right? So and he networked with all these people all over the world. And so to go from being in a relative backwater like San Jose and then whammo in San Diego, and I started doing my own networking because along the way, not only did I become a part of the Alien Encounter Support Group that Sean Atlanty put together every month where I met other people like us, but I started branching out and doing my own research, and I became great friends to this day with Eve Lorgan. Some of your listeners are probably familiar with her and her work. And then she and I set up our own alien abductee support group, as well as a military abduction support group, right? Because by then we were networking. We had friends and contacts in the high desert of Southern California, where there was a lot of related reptilian and military activity going on. So we were meeting all these different people and learning from each other. And, of course, back then I went to a lot of UFO conferences. So the International UFO Congress, can't remember what year it was, 92, 93, but it was a life-changing event because I'd never met so many other people that have had encounters. And whether it was part of the energetic harvesting Loosh Fest, I'm a glass-half-full kind of guy. I try not to think that way in this regard. But after I left that conference and after meeting all those other people that had all those experiences, and there were so many spooks and government agents at that conference, they were everywhere. So for those of us who've been on the receiving end of harassment, manipulation, psyops, what have you, right, it really caused us to bond even more closely with one another. I was there for the whole week. Some people were only there for a few days. But, the feeling of kinship, of camaraderie, and then, oh, look, that guy's a spook, absolutely a spook. He's been harassing so-and-so, right? That bonded us closer together. So when I was kind of torn away from that, I had to go back to the mundane, like, workaday world. It was an emotional letdown, let me tell you, right? Sitting there at the airport, about to fly out of then McCarran Airport in Vegas back to San Diego, I was seriously bummed out. And then to show you the kind of dichotomy and the kind of weird world I lived in, a couple of days later, I was standing in the where they kept all the crypto gear, right? Because I used to be in communications for Naval Air Force, the U.S. Pacific Fleet, and they had this big extra duty size shredder there, right? I mean, you could just drop gobs of classified messages in there, and we'd actually pour like motor oil or some kind of lubricant oil, squirt it over the paper so it wouldn't fry out the machine. Anyway, I was standing in front of this extra large shredder, shredding all these classified documents, and then it hit me, the irony, the dichotomy of here I am at this conference for a week, when all these people, all these government agents all around, and then, we've got this bond together, and then we're ripped apart. This is really before the internet kicked into high gear, right? And then we were kind of ripped apart from each other. And I'm back in that day-to-day world, and I'm in a classified facility shredding documents, and basically working for the very system that's spying on me, harassing my friends, harassing my new friends that I just met, right? So I was standing there crying my eyes out as I shredded those documents. I'll never forget it.
You talk about reptilian and military. So can you tell me the differences? Are there differences? Is it really just one type of hybridization type thing that like Jacob spoke about and Hopkins spoke about? Or is there many different types of abductions? Are some good? Are some bad?
Well, yeah, about the reptilians, they're one of the races that utilize genetic hybridization upon the subject population here on Earth. But they're not the only species of beings that do this. And I think that some of the gray factions actually essentially work for the reptilians. They do a lot of heavy lifting as far as abducting is concerned and a lot of the medical work. And at the behest of the reptilians, almost in a state of cosmic vassalage, they enhance people, if you will. They imbue more reptilian DNA into certain bloodlines of people to make them more, quote-unquote, reptilian. And I believe that the ruling, they've been variously described as the elite, the cabal, call them what you want, what one will. They are the ruling hybrid plantation managers of this planet. They have, the reptilians and other archontic negative beings have exerted control through these hybrid bloodlines. I'm not the only one that talks about that. In fact, this concept is many, many centuries old. Many people have known about this for some time, but the reptilians seem to have taken it to another level. As far as people's perceptions of these experiences, well, for me it varies, and other people it varies, because I've had encounters with positive and what I would perceive to be negative beings. The negative beings they don't care about one's personal sovereignty. They don't care about how traumatized or fearful we wind up after these experiences, after these abductions. And sometimes people can have quite serious maladies, health issues after these experiences. And the negative beings, especially the ones in the hardcore hybridization agendas, they don't care if they leave women reproductively all messed up, like all this internal scarring within their reproductive system because their ovum is taken over and over and over, right? So many women have gotten hysterectomies over the years, and as like my mentor pointed out, they'll never know the real reason was because these aliens have been scooping eggs out of them all this time, right? So from that standpoint, to me, that's an outrageous violation of our personal sovereignty. And I do believe there's a lot of mind control that's exerted because these beings, reptilians in particular, but a number of different beings, they have the ability to alter the perception of people, make them think, for example, that they're having an encounter or a dream with friendly, benevolent, Nordic, Palladian-looking beings, but really they could be reptilians or other beings, right? Although there are Palladians, there are Nordic beings, they're not all good. There's this notion that if these beings look anything close to human, then of a necessity they have to be good, but that's not necessarily the case. Some people have had a lot of mind control and behavior modification exerted upon them, and they have a very kind of a new age mentality about their own alien abduction experiences. But what's happened is when you get some of those people under deep regression and then this horrific kind of experience or series of experiences come out, that leaves them emotionally shattered. Now, what happens, what's interesting is after a few days, like this reboot occurs, and then they're back to the same new age kind of mentality again, like all the stuff that showed up in regression never happened. I've seen that happen before. So, yes, it varies from recipient to recipient, but in general, what they've done, the reptilian overlordship, as my mentor called it, everything that we're seeing today is an outward manifestation of this reptilian overlordship. the promotion of all these aberrant, atrocious things, normalizing all this heinous activities, barbarous practices, the glorification of cannibalism, for example, et cetera, that's all an outward manifestation of this reptilian overlordship agenda. And so the reason why I focus on the reptilians is because not many people do. My mentor, Barbara Bartley, was one of the very few, and her first protege, Dr. Carla Turner, were some of the only people that ever delved into the subject at this level, right? And I learned a lot from Barbara Bartley and Dr. Carla Turner. But I validated a lot of their findings with the work that I did on my own and the work that I did with Eve Morgan. So what often happens in experiences, there's this notion that it's grays, and nothing but grays and hybrid, various hybrid variations in between humans and grays. But in a lot of these experiences, people don't even have to be taken up into a ship. A lot of the experiences can happen right in their bedroom, where a portal opens up and one or more entities come out. And a person in the context of a single experience, an encounter experience, can see two or more different types of species. They can see grays, they can see insectoids, they can see mantis beings, they can see reptilians. It varies. And in the mix, you can see Nordic-looking beings, Palladian-looking beings. Barbara Bartley used to talk about assemblies where people would be taken before like an assembly of different types of ETs, all different types of species. And they're all there almost, she described it similar in a way to Star Wars, where there's this big arena or this big hall, and there's all these different ETs there, like a parliament, if you will. A lot of the archontic negative beings have created proxies, if you will, hybridized bloodlines of themselves. And certain types of psychics with the etheric third eye vision, they can look at a host human and see the entity possessing them. They can see the entity that's taken them up as a host.
What's the conclusion? Are they there yet or soon? Or this is the big war that people talk about. Is that right?
Well, yeah. So, with the introduction of all this nanotechnology, I'll just leave it at that. But on a global planetary scale, we are seeing this forced march towards this singularity, right? With so many people having what essentially are nano operating systems inside of them, right, all over the world. And there's no telling the implications once people die, shed off an immortal coil. Is that the end of it? Or have these entities, mantis beings, reptilians, and other beings, do they still have their hooks into these people's souls and consciousness? Because there is circumstantial evidence that these beings not only track bloodlines and generationally, but that they can come back lifetime after lifetime because they have a means of setting energetic hooks into people. So they know when they re-enter the earthly plane through childbirth, for example, and then whammo. And if they've been tracking a certain bloodline anyway, and then someone is born again, and then they've had interactions with that person in a previous incarnation, for example, well, they're right onto them again. And another point that needs to be made is a lot of our incarnations didn't only occur on Earth. Some of us have had past parallel incarnations on other worlds where we were essentially aliens, for lack of a better term. Like I like to think that some people here are boots in the ground. They represent the ground force, if you will, anchoring higher dimensional frequencies because someone has to do it. Somebody has to be here to resist what's going on, this reptilian overlordship. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I was just thinking out loud on one quick point about the reincarnation thing. I know that might offend people, but the Emperor Justinian, who chroniclers at that time regarded as what we would call a shapeshifter, right? Even by the lurid standards of Roman emperors, Justinian was extremely sadistic, killed thousands of people, tortured them. And he and his court created the Council of Nicaea, which essentially did away with the doctrine of reincarnation, right? Got rid of it. And so from that point on, it was not part of the doctrine anymore. So people really need to plug into that aspect. There should be no conflict between someone, say, being a Christian on the one hand and believing in reincarnation. General Patton was a classic example, someone who was a devout Christian Bible reader, but he was also very much into reincarnation and believed himself to be a reincarnated warrior many times over.
Going back to the military part of it, a lot of times what I'm told is the military comes in, they come in a lot of times after these abductions because they want to see what happened, what they are doing, what they're up to. Is it more that the military, are they in cahoots or are they kind of, hey, the aliens are moving forward without us and we're trying to catch up and see what they're doing?
Yes, I'm absolutely convinced that there are factions within the deep black military and aerospace community that work in conjunction with non-human beings. And this has been going on for some time. If you go back into the ancient literature, ancient texts, the wars of gods and men, the gods walking the earth alongside humans, it's a very old concept. And then you add on to that the lore from the inner earth stories going back countless millennia of large, relatively advanced civilizations that live in the cavern systems beneath our feet, right? And so particularly the hybridized secret society members, the hybridized members of the deep black military aerospace community, it's been in their bloodlines all along to interact with non-human beings in the context of these ceremonial workings, for example. What are the odds that Jack Parsons, a disciple of Aleister Crowley, would be involved in the Babylon working with L. Ron Hubbard for the express purpose of opening huge dimensional portals to let beings in, right? So the concept of interacting with non-human beings is firmly embedded in the esoteric lore all around the world. So what we're seeing is the latest extension of that. And Roswell was not the first crash retrieval. There were other ones before that, but especially after Roswell, more and more technology was recovered as a result of crashed alien spacecraft. Sometimes there were living aliens found at the crash sites, and over time, this alliance was formed, if you will. And I tend to think that the human element of it, but it's a hybridized human element of it, right? It's not like necessarily all these good people that are interacting with aliens, because it's precisely what I would consider to be this hybridized control faction within the military aerospace community that's interacting with these beings. And like these aliens, these marauding, abducting aliens, these elements of the military care not a whit for our personal sovereignty. They care not a whit for our freedom, because they kidnap people that have had experiences. And this alliance goes at least as far back as the late 1940s, early 1950s. I'm satisfied there was some kind of alliance, if you will, between one or more ET races and elements of the U.S. government. This may have started as early as the Eisenhower administration. So, and if you listen to whistleblowers, real ones, like Dan Sherman, you can find his story out there. I'm satisfied that there has been this exchange at work where the ETs, certain ET groups, provide technology, know-how, training, if you will, to deep black elements of the military aerospace community in return for turning a blind eye to all these abductions that's taking place, because the aliens are still advancing their own hybrid agenda, right? And so now, and if you listen to the comments of Ben Rich, the late director of Lockheed Skunk Works, he told Jim Goodall, who I've had on my show twice, we have technology, and I'm paraphrasing here, in the Nevada desert that's 50 years beyond your comprehension. He didn't say 50 years beyond your understanding of aviation or engineering. He said 50 years beyond your comprehension. And Jim Goodall is a worldwide expert in all things stealth fighter, the SR-71, submarines, nuclear submarines. He's a world-class expert. And to be told that his level of understanding is nothing compared to what these engineers are working on in places like the high desert of Southern California, Palmdale.
I got to put a period on you there. Period. Keep watching the night skies. Continue with me to seek out the strange and uncover the unknown for Coast to Coast AM.
Vicki Joy Anderson with us. Vicki, welcome back. How have you been? What is exactly sleep paralysis?
Well, it is a phenomenon that has been experienced by thousands, if not tens of thousands of people. In the past, we were reticent to speak about it, lest we be slapped with a schizophrenic label or worse. But now that there's a disclosure and more people feel comfortable talking about these things, a lot of people are talking about it. It's a phenomenon during sleep where people feel that there's some sort of entity or oppressive darkness in the room that overcomes them. Many people report being paralyzed, not being able to move. They talk about horror movie-like experiences of dread and having their souls dragged to hell. Very strange spiritual, supernatural things to be attached to something if it's simply narcolepsy.
Is it tied to the brain at all?
I think that it is, George, and specifically I think it is probably tied into our pineal gland, which we know has been called the seat or the window of the soul by philosophers in days past. And I definitely think that it is exacerbated when we are on various psychotropic medication or over-the-counter drugs, which shows me that it is tied into our neural pathways.
Now, how about night terrors? Very similar to sleep paralysis, related?
It's similar. It's definitely within the same umbrella, but it is a different phenomenon. People with night terrors tend to, they can move, they can scream. In fact, you can usually hear them a mile away. A night terror is a very loud, violent, aggressive thrashing, whereas sleep paralysis is a very quiet, silent paralyzation. And unlike sleep paralysis, where most people have a very vivid account the next day of what happened to them, a lot of people who experience night terrors will have no memory the next day of anything having happened.
How many people does this happen to percentage-wise, Vicki?
The statistics online, depending on where you're looking, will say anywhere from 17 to 51%. That's only the people that are admitting to it. So I think the statistic is actually much higher.
What does modern medicine say about this?
Well, they have different things to say. They kind of have their own agenda. Most of the official online narratives, they're going to chalk it off to narcolepsy, sleep apnea, stress, trauma. And it's not that those things cannot come into play and be intermingled with the phenomenon, that's for sure. But what I feel like they don't have a really satisfying answer to is why shadow people and incubuses and succubuses and various black shadows and red glowing eyes and alien grays tend to accompany this phenomenon.
Oh, that's a good point. Now, they have come up with phrases that are tied into some of these things. The incubus, the succubus, what are they?
Yeah, that's the one everyone wants to talk about. They're also known as the ubi entities because the plural is the incubi and the succubi. This is the ones that you'll hear celebrities and things talking about. But I think it's more accurate to classify these as vampiric beings. If you're going by the ancient definition of the Ubis, because this is in Mesopotamian, Akkadian, Sumerian lore, etc., Epic of Gilgamesh, and in various ancient Mesopotamian writings about the Apkallu, as well as various other places, Dead Sea Scrolls, etc., they aren't just sexual demons. They are also known for bloodletting, blood drinking, draining the life force, terrorizing victims at night, nightmares, shape-shifting, and in ancient lore, even death.
So it sounds like, Vicki Joy, that these entities are beyond the imagination of somebody going to sleep, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, you always get the accusation, and you get this in UFO lore as well, that the reason why everyone's describing the same entities, the reason why they're all saying that they're gray or green and they're 3 feet tall with big black eyes is because they've all swapped stories and they've all read the same accounts and they're just sharing this collective mass hysteria. But the fact of the matter is there are accounts that go all the way back to the 16th, 17th century where people didn't have the internet, they didn't have television, they weren't sharing stories, and they were all explaining the same phenomenon. They were explaining the same creatures, the same entities, the same experience. And so there is, I hope, George, we've reached a point in disclosure and a point in knowledge and research and the hive mind mentality. I hope that we have all gotten to a point where we can be intellectually honest about this, that if thousands of people are saying that they've had this experience and seen these things, let's believe the victims. Let's listen to them. Let's hear them out.
Oh, absolutely. No question about that. Lots of people, Vicki Joy, claim that they are abducted by aliens. You think it could be something else?
Well, yeah, depending on who you're talking, every, quadrant has their own specific agenda and their own idea of who this could be. I really wish everyone would come to the same table, because I think we all have pieces of the puzzle and we would benefit from hearing each other's stories. But, the doctors have an explanation, the psychiatrists have an explanation, the sleep experts have an explanation, the brain scientists have an explanation, but the pastors and the priests have explanations too. The occult has an explanation. The New Age has an explanation. And so if we relegate all of this to narcolepsy, or we relegate all of this to demon possession, we're going to miss key ingredients to this, and we're not going to ever really understand the full story. Part of the reason why we can't get to the bottom of this, and so many people are suffering from it, is because people are plugging their ears and they're only willing to listen to their own narrative. And so they're missing key pieces of the puzzle.
Pretty interesting. How did you come upon all this? In your biblical studies or not?
No. In fact, it's very hard to find a pastor who's willing to talk about or even believe these things. It's one of the problems I have in my work is I get a lot of phone calls from Christians and Catholics and religious people who have come to me because when they have gone to their religious leaders, they're either gaslit, they're eye rolled, or they're shooed away. There's not a lot of training in seminary for this kind of thing. And my interest, which is probably a poor choice of words, but what caused me to stumble upon this was 40 years of experiencing it on a continual, consistent basis and not having anyone to speak to, because they either thought that you needed to be exorcised by a priest or put on heavy psychotropic medication. And the fact of the matter, George, is the people that are suffering from this, they're not crazy. They don't have low IQs. They're not uneducated. They're very healthy, intelligent individuals, and they're looking for answers.
Your title is They Only Come Out at Night, and that seems to be the case in all these cases. How come?
Well, I think that in the past, that was the most advantageous time to come to people, because it's the time when an average person experiences several times of altered states of consciousness. We fall into altered states of consciousness as we go in and out of various sleep stages and as we go to sleep and wake up. And so it's an ideal time where this veil is thin. Now, you can obviously have these encounters in the daytime. People can have them during a nice Sunday nap. And if you have got chemicals involved, if there is psychedelics or various drugs and things involved, really the key isn't the moon. The key is altered states of consciousness. That seems to be the liminal space.
And doesn't the sleep paralysis also occur moments before you go to sleep?
Well, yes. It can happen moments before you fall asleep or moments before you wake up. And the fancy terms for that are hypnopompic and hypnagogic for those waiting for the quiz later on. But as we drift into sleep and out of sleep, there's these brief moments of altered states of consciousness. And so they've got two shots at you.
Now, do you think all these cases are real, or what's going on here?
Not necessarily, George. Obviously, sometimes they're just nightmares. Sometimes it can be hallucinatory from psychedelics. You hear a lot of people that talk about very similar.
Is there a distinct difference, Vicki Joy, between sleep paralysis, which seems medical, and night terrors, which seems like evil entities.
Yeah, there is a difference between the two. I do think evil entities come into play in both scenarios. Night terrors, for the most part, seemed to target young children. It seems to be something that happens in adolescence. A lot of times sleep paralysis begins at puberty or hits at puberty. This is, of course, generalizations. They can hit at any time. But many people with sleep paralysis also report shadow men, hat men, alien grays, gargoyles, blacker than black shadows, spiders, snakes, demons, gargoyles, imps, you name it. So we definitely see the presence of entities in sleep paralysis scenarios as well.
Are some of them seeing entities, like shadows on the wall that a light may be casting? It's almost like that scenario with clouds where you look at a cloud, you see a face, and there's really no face, but it looks like it. Is that possible?
Absolutely. There have to be several things at play for it to be a legitimate sleep paralysis encounter. There are levels of dread and fear that accompany it. That's not just, I think, someone's broken into the home. There are disembodied voices typically in one's head. Pretty much everyone collectively reports a feeling that their soul is in jeopardy and that they're going to be dragged to hell or into the abyss. And so there's a sense that one cannot move. They're paralyzed. There's a lot more going on. So if it's just a shadow by the door, chances are you've got a cat or a streetlight issue.
How did these vampires get into this picture?
Well, actually, I think that initially, back in the day, that's what they were. We've sort of demoted this cast of characters down to one-dimensional beings. They're nebulous, they're vague. The Shadow Man, the Hat Man, the Greys. And so they just seem like shadowy figures. But in ancient lore, in Mesopotamian lore in particular, the Lamashtu, they actually had names, George, and they had identities and personality traits, and they were worshipped even though they were feared. And so Lamashtu was dubbed the demon lord, the goddess of monsters, the mother of beasts, the mistress of insanity. And other cultures had their own version of Lamashtu. There was the Lamia and the Lalitu and the Lilu, and of course Lilith, as most of us have heard of. And these were night-stalking demonesses who would come out at night and would take the life force of women and children and defenseless people as they slept. So in the original backstory lore, before they became these one-dimensional Hat Man, Shadow Man, these were real gods and goddesses in various pantheons and were worshipped as entities that were real and were considered to be gods and titans.
Now, are most of these entities evil and bad? Are there any good ones here?
Well, there can be good and bad entities that we interact with in the spiritual realm. I mean, even, in the Bible, we have angels that come down, and we have examples where characters would go into the third heaven and see the throne room of God. And so I think a better question than are they good or evil is, are they safe or are they dangerous? And why that's a better question is because whether good or evil, not any of these entities are what I would classify as safe, in the sense that they're not our species. So they're not necessarily going to think, act, behave, or emote the way that we instinctively believe that they will or they should. So I think that we have to be careful letting our feelings and our emotions lead us, because there's a lot of people that encounter evil entities that experience euphoric feelings of love and light. And then there are people that experience good or angelic beings, like those in the Bible, that were terrified when they came into contact with these beings. So we need a better litmus test than how good we felt or how safe we felt when we were in the presence of one of these things.
Vicki Joy, what do they want? What's their end game?
Well, I think there's a short-term easy answer, and there's a more long-term complex answer. In the short term, if you go with sort of the theological dictionary definition of a lot of these entities, for the ones that are disembodied spirits, whether they're the dead or they're the Nephilim, depending on your worldview, they have lost their bodies. They're looking for vessels because they vicariously want to enjoy being human. They want to re-engage with the five senses. They want to be able to touch and taste and feel again and experience emotions. So they're feeling, in their disembodied state, they are unable to get a full sense of being alive, so to speak. But the longer, more complex answer to that, George, would be that they do want allegiance. There's a reason why these were considered gods and goddesses to the ancients, because they did elicit worship and devotion from those that saw them.
Can they be stopped?
Absolutely. Easier than most people think. This goes back into the idea that these are vampiric entities. And just like in Hollywood and in the romantic tales of vampires, there's this rule, this unwritten rule that a vampire cannot bother you unless it's given invitation and it steps over the threshold. And likewise, if it is not given invitation, or it is denied that invitation, or it is told to get out, this is really their kryptonite, and this is where our power lies. They really cannot harass us if we don't want to be harassed. And if we've opened a door somehow, we only need to figure out how to close that door.
I notice that you dedicate your book to one of our guests, Russ Dizdar, who passed away a couple of years ago. He was a good guy. Good guy.
He was a great guy and a good friend. I miss him.
When you were taking Bible studies at the university, did you ever expect that you'd be dealing with these kinds of entities?
Not at all. In fact, George, it's funny. I remember one Bible class in particular where they were kind of starting to go into the fringes of, probably spiritual warfare or something. I don't know. And because of my experiences with sleep paralysis, I raised my hand and I said, well, what about the incubus and the succubus? And my professor gave me this very blank look, and it became very clear that no one in the room, including the professor, had any idea what I was talking about, and I had to kind of tuck tail and back slowly out of the room after that one. People thought I was pretty much a nutcase.
Give me an example, Vicki Joy. Let's deal with sleep paralysis first, and then we'll deal with night terrors second, of an individual who had sleep paralysis as they were going to bed. Then how have they told you their story?
Oh, I've heard a million of them, George. I love it when people say you never heard anything like this, and it's usually the 20th time I've heard it. That's not to diminish the experience, because for anyone who's had it, it's terrifying. But most people, it's really interesting, George. A lot of people will even have a premonition before they go to bed that it's going to happen. A lot of people talk about this, and of course the scientific explanation of that is, well, you become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you're dwelling on it and fearing it, it's going to happen. But it's a very strange thing that unless it's happened to you, you won't understand it. But for those people who are unfortunately experienced in this area, the torment actually starts before you even fall asleep. And then when you go to sleep, it can start in the dream realm. So you're having a nice, normal, sweet dream, and then all of a sudden these entities enter into the dream world. And most of us will say, oh, no, not again. And so the torment can actually last well beyond the actual 5 or 10 minutes that you're in the room struggling to wake up.
That's an interesting take. Now, would you say night terrors are worse than sleep paralysis episodes?
Oh, that's a great question. I've never had night terrors, but I've talked to people who do. And I guess the advantage to night terrors is by the time you wake up, you have no memory of it. You usually are being told by a family member who you woke up that it happened. But even that can be perplexing, because that's confusing when when you're being told all of these things are happening to you that you have no memory of. And I suppose that is kind of one thing that they have in common with the UFO experiencers, because they've got some missing time and they understand that something's happened, but they don't necessarily remember. So the traumatic thing about the sleep paralysis is you kind of remember every second of it, and it can affect then your lack of desire to go to sleep the next night, etc. So I guess there's give and take. I mean, if someone asked me which one would you prefer, it'd be kind of an ironic wager, because no one would prefer either one. But I think the danger in both of them is whether the experiences are remembered or they're not, whether they're traumatic or they're not. I think that there's other things going on during these experiences that attach or piggyback from the astral realm into the physical realm. And that, I think, is what's dangerous about it, is the part of the experience that we remember isn't necessarily the whole of the experience. And so if someone is trying to deal with getting rid of it, or they're trying to close doors, or they're trying to make their peace with God, or whatever they are doing to rid themselves of this harassment, they probably don't even have the whole story as to what's gone on with them. And that's where it gets mysterious, and that's where it gets difficult to really get to the bottom of it. Because I think that there's aspects of this experience that is, like in the UFO encounters, is wiped from our memory.
Of the two episodes, sleep paralysis and night terrors, are they just both bad, or is there one worse than the other?
I think that they are both traumatic experiences for the people that experience them. I think with a lot of people who have night terrors, many times it's accompanied by sleepwalking. So even if they don't necessarily remember the dream, or they don't remember screaming, a lot of times they'll wake up having slept walk, and they'll be disoriented, and it's especially terrifying when they've made their way out of the house. I had a close family member who had night terrors and would sleepwalk and was found out in the street quite often. Many people who have talked to me have said that mom and dad would find them in the front yard or down the street. So that's kind of what makes night terrors a little risky and dangerous. But I think that the things that make it most dangerous, it's not that you're going to die in your sleep or something like that. You know, the horror movies like to make it out to be like, you know, Dracula's going to come and suck all your blood, or you're going to die or something.
Right.
The side effects of these experiences that are the most kind of depleting are the fact that there are attachments that come into the physical realm with you. And that's what most people who call me are complaining about, is the exhaustion and the mental and the physical ailments and the confusion and the torment that is following them into the physical realm.
When you're having a nightmare, is it possible you're having night terrors?
It's definitely possible, but again, most people with night terrors do not have a memory of it. So if they're having a nightmare, they're probably not remembering the dream either. Or they would say, you know, hey, I don't remember screaming or sleepwalking, but I do remember having a bad dream. And most of them don't even report remembering having a bad dream.
If these night terrors are the real deal and these entities are visiting people, how do you get rid of them?
That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? And there's not a cookie cutter scenario, because so many people are experiencing these things for different reasons. Some people are willingly and consciously opening the doors, and some are not. Some are really perplexed as to why this is happening to them. And so basically, for those that are willfully seeking this out, I would say, you know, if you don't want 20 raccoons on your back porch every night, stop giving them hot dogs, right? You know, it's like stop doing the things that draw them. But it's not always that easy, because there are a lot of people that have no idea why this is happening. And so what I try to do when I counsel people on the phone is, let's find the source of these episodes, and let's get to the source and see what door got opened and what we can do to close the door. And this can be a multitude of things, George, and not all of them are the obvious ones. You know, if you go and you talk to a priest or a pastor, they're going to say, you opened the door because of sin, or you played with the Ouija board, or there's like the common answers that you get. But it doesn't even have to be anything that complicated, George. It can be trauma. It can be mental illness, psychotropic medication. It can be bloodlines. It can be ancestral things done in the past. It can have to do with the home that you've moved into and the activity that's been there. So I try to work with everybody on an individual basis when they contact me, because no two stories are alike. Will prayer work toward these things? It absolutely will, George. And, you know, there's been quote-unquote scientific studies, and even MUFON back in the 90s, I think, Joe Jordan did a study. I don't know that this was the result he was looking for, but it's the result that he found. He interviewed somewhere between 200 and 250 UFO abductees, and he found that a percentage of them had all determined on their own that if they cried out during the abduction, whether it was the Lord's Prayer, Psalm 23, or the name of Jesus, that the abduction would immediately stop and they would be back in their room awake and safe. And so that was a really controversial finding back in the 90s. I think that was covered up for a while. Does the Catholic Church get involved in this? Is this almost like an exorcism? Yeah, in fact, the Catholic Church does a much better job than most evangelical churches, unfortunately. But they have, you know, a set exorcism ritual, which is typically what they do. And I don't know how consistently successful that is, George. I haven't heard too many people saying that wiped the problem out for them. Not necessarily. Back to the UFO abductions. What do you think's going on there? Well, I think that it's similar, but not obviously not the same thing. I think this is another agenda by supernatural or entities from a spiritual realm. They have a different agenda than the sleep paralysis agenda. The way I kind of break it out into layman's terms, George, is we all know from the UFO abductions that there's some sort of medical or genetic thing going on there. People talk about going into laboratories and being up on the metal table and things like that. Sleep paralysis, I think, is also an abduction scenario, but you're going into the astral realm, and I think that is more of a grooming the teachers. When you look at pop culture and the minds that have influenced us in philosophy, religion, in the occult, in literature, a lot of these people that to this day we admire their work, they were card-carrying theosophists. They were astral projectors. And so I think in that case, the people that are going up into the astral realm are being trained and groomed to be spokespeople for the religion and the agenda and the governance of that astral realm. Are children subjected to sleep paralysis or night terrors? Yes. Yep. All the time. In fact, a lot of times, the people that are subjected to the nightmare type agendas, like sleep paralysis and night terrors, a lot of times they are the most vulnerable because they're targeting people that can't really defend themselves. So in addition to children, there can also be people in various special needs categories, nonverbal. I also see it happening to a lot of elderly people because with a child, you can chalk them off to telling stories, and with an elderly person, you can chalk everything off to dementia. So it's a very clever operation. They tend to target people that can't really defend themselves when they need to. Vicki Joy, I want to thank you for being on the program. Keep in touch, okay? Vicki Joy Anderson, the name of the book, They Only Come Out at Night, which you can get from L.A. Marzulli and his website at lamarzulli.net.